One of the most important works in the dark fantasy genre, Claymore, has garnered a niche group of hardcore fans over the years. Despite the manga having come out in 2001, followed by a relatively successful anime adaptation in 2007, we would still call it an underrated series, considering its quality and depth. You can clearly see the influence from a number of series in Norihiro Araki's piece de resistance, especially Berserk, which often leads to the two being compared by fans of the genre. Although the premise of the story and characters are totally different, one can't deny the obvious influence Kentaro Miura's seminal work had on Claymore. Just like Miura, Norihiro Araki has managed to build an extremely detailed universe set in a medieval world plagued by threats that are seemingly both supernatural and scientific in nature. The world of Claymore is plagued by beings called the Yoma, who are the apex predators of the land where the story is set. Even the weakest Yoma have the ability to decimate populations of entire towns all by themselves, as they have the ability to blend in with humans. The only way to take care of this threat is for humans to hire the services of extraordinary half-breeds that are part Yoma and part human, called Claymores, thanks to the giant swords that they carry. Similar to what some of you might have guessed, the Witchers from Andrzej Sapkowski's novels are titled the same. However, in the case of the Claymores, they're all females outside of the very first generation of these warriors, who were all males, and throughout the course of their order's history, they've had their fair share of triumphs, failures, betrayals, and heroic deeds. As the curtains of deceit begin to fall, Araki weaves a tale that will shake the very foundation of his character's world. Thanks to the excellent writing, we as fans have had plenty of opportunities to come up with our very own theories regarding some of the more esoteric parts of this story. In this marvelous video, we intend to explore some of these theories and present them to you, so put on your tinfoil hats and hang tight as we dive once more into the gritty and dangerous world of the Abyssal Ones. There's more than one island like the one Claymore is set on. While initially, we're made to feel like the entire Claymore universe comprises only the land in which the story is set, we later find out that it's only a part of a much larger world. In fact, the story of Claymore is set on a small island not far from the main continent. We learn that there are two powerful nations locked in conflict for a very long time in the larger landmass, and that one of these nations has a clan of individuals called the Dragonkin who can assume monstrous forms, granting them powers and abilities far beyond the comprehension of ordinary mortals. The losing empire, in order to combat this threat, has been experimenting on the people of this island to create human and Yoma hybrids that they can control. There are several factors that lead us to believe that the island where Claymore is set is only one of many such islands. First of all, we know that the people behind the creation of the Yoma are fighting a desperate battle and need results as soon as possible to turn the tide of said battle. With the situation so dire, it wouldn't make sense for them to have placed all their hopes and dreams in a single research facility. The Yoma are created by experimenting on the genes of fallen dragonkin and embedding them in humans, turning them into the gut-devouring monsters we're familiar with. The fact that a dead dragonkin lay in a secret area of the organization's headquarters means that the dragonkin has been slayed by the rulers of the organization without the aid of their experiments. This means that they are able to kill the Asarakam on their own, but it most likely involves a large amount of casualties to achieve such a gargantuan task. The reason we're stating this is because if a specimen of the dragonkin was found within the headquarters of the organization, it wouldn't be impossible to imagine that the Empire could send these things to other locations as well. It would only make sense if, that for whatever reason, an experimental island was destroyed, there would be other fail-safes to ensure that the war efforts don't discontinue. With the stakes of the war so high and the battle on the verge of being lost, putting all your eggs in one basket makes no sense at all. In the case of Claymore, it was the warriors that rebelled, but who knows, on other islands, maybe the Abyssal Ones were far more powerful than even Priscilla and slaughtered the entire population of the island, and the location was deemed unsalvageable by the Empire. The fact that the organization seems to have been a wing of the Empire's administration only makes sense for it to be merely one of the many branches of the department that it belongs to. An island functions as the ideal landmass for such experiments to take place, as it acts as a natural prison while granting cover for the entire operation. The denizens of this island don't seem too aware of the greater world outside and continue to inhabit it, despite living alongside monsters. This allows the higher powers that control the organization to set the tone for each experimental location to produce ideal results. While it might be true that there are a number of these experimental islands, they might not know about each other's existence thanks to the clandestine nature of this operation. It would probably harm the image of the Empire if its people were to find out that their rulers were experimenting and creating monsters when their soldiers and loved ones had fallen to similar monsters in their defense. Also, considering the fact that we're dealing with a venture funded by an empire, albeit one under fire, we're sure that there's sufficient funding behind this project for there to be multiple sites for it. Looking at all the points we've made, we believe that there are many more islands like the one in which the story of the series takes place. The Claymores are funding the Great War on the continent. In the previous section, we discussed how the entire Claymore project was funded by the Empire as its last resort in fighting against the inhuman Asarakan. However, the reverse could also be true. Large-scale conflicts take an enormous toll on the finances of the parties engaged in it, and looking at the history of the Claymores themselves, this war has been going on for a considerable amount of time. We know that Araki is a young adult by the end of the series when he's introduced as a boy. The same for Claire, who's not even in her teens when we get to meet her for the first time, but is an adult for most of the series. For such a prolonged war to be sustained, the Empire must have funding from various sources. This is when we remembered that the Claymores charge a fee for their services which they deposit to the organization. As far as we know, the Claymores aren't paid for their services directly by the organization in the form of wages or salaries. They are most likely given a stipend to spend on their journey, with the funds from their hunt being all transferred to their masters. Considering the number of Yoma threats that probably exist on the island, the Claymores are never out of work, meaning the money never stops flowing into the organization's coffers. While some of that money might go into research and development, which is made evident by the introduction of the likes of Clarice, Alicia, and Beth, we imagine the surplus money will probably be funneled back to the Empire. The organization treats the Claymore experiments very much like a business one in which they have a complete monopoly. Since they produce the Yoma, who are the problem, and manufacture the solution as well in the form of Claymores, they can control the supply and demand. It's basic economics, really. Whenever they need more funds, they simply increase the number of active Yomas whose bounties they collect to line up their coffers. The disposable nature of Claymores themselves can also be cited to show how this is true. It's not a stretch to say that, to the organization, the Claymores are nothing but mere commodities given their expendable nature. Well, as a whole, the project might be paramount to the Empire's success. As individuals, they're merely tools. This makes them perfect to be used for such economic purposes because even the organization seems to have an ever-ready supply chain of warriors to replenish the ranks of the fallen. Now, if one were to take our theory about multiple experimental islands to be true, one could imagine how much wealth was pouring into the Empire's treasury. Since we're on the topic of economics and taking our arguments and theories to be true, one can say that the reason the war is being so prolonged is because certain individuals are profiting off of it. This isn't a new phenomenon, as even in our real-world history, there have been multiple major companies that profited from the various wars and are now household names. The Empire, for whatever reason, seems to be holding out just fine despite what is presented to us as monstrous foes. This could mean that the entire Claymore project, or projects, not being able to produce the caliber of Alicia and Beth could simply continue until Priscilla threatens to destroy everything because the development of the project was stunted for vested interests. All of these things would explain why the organization and their masters have been able to sustain a war that has lasted at least a couple of generations. Asarakam are far more powerful than the abyssal beings. As the awakened beings are created from Claymore, who are already mixed breeds, the powers they inherit from the Asarakam can only be assumed to be diluted. Despite this, an awakened being is one of the most powerful creatures in the Claymore series. A powerful awakened being is capable of single-handedly demolishing scores of Claymores on its path. Now imagine what a pure-blooded Asarakam is capable of. Even the weakest of the Dragonkin have to at least be at the same power level as a second or third ranked awakened warrior. Only the most powerful individuals from the series, like Teresa in her awakened form, Priscilla, and Ivy, might have been capable of putting up a fight against these beings. However, against the strongest of the Asarakam, we believe that they would have been utterly decimated. Just like how in other creature features, a pure-blooded entity is always exponentially more powerful than the half-breeds, unless said half-breed is the protagonist, the same could hold true for Claymores as well. In fact, this is only made more evident if one pauses to think that the Claymores, Yomas, and awakened beings are all a desperate attempt to reverse engineer or copy the powers and abilities of the Asatacom. They are nothing more than pale imitations of the original. The organization could just ship warriors about to awaken to the mainland and set them loose against the Asatacom instead of wasting manpower and resources to deal with them secretly. The organization loves killing two birds with one stone, and this fits perfectly with their modus operandi. They would have been rid of awakening warriors far from the eyes of other Claymores and the people of the island while testing their creation against its intended target. The awakened beings would have been killed or killed a number of Asatacom, filling their purpose. For a faction that isn't opposed to creating monsters to fight monsters, this way of thinking isn't so far-fetched. They didn't do so because they knew that their failures would be exposed, as the awakened beings were literally no match for the Dragonkin and would have been decimated, possibly bringing an end to their experiments. This is why we believe that the Asatacom are infinitely more powerful than the awakened beings. Roxanne's death's mystery explored. Roxanne is perhaps the most infamous Claymore in the history of the series. While Claymores do not generally have a moral code they need to follow outside of not killing humans, they are presented to us as saviors of humanity, making the audience automatically think of them as the good guys. However, as the series progresses, we get to learn that this couldn't be further from the truth, as the Claymores can get away with breaking the rules quite a lot as long as they're not caught doing it. Another thing to note is that just because they share a bond of trauma related to Yoma and belong to the same organization doesn't mean that they're all on good terms with each other. This doesn't mean that they're evil though, at least most of them aren't. Roxanne is perhaps one of the exceptions to this, as she is undoubtedly one of the most twisted and sick minds in the entire series. She's a psychopathic serial killer who just so also happened to be one of the top 8 strongest #1 warriors in the entire history of the organization. We've already done an extremely detailed video on Roxanne detailing her life, powers, abilities, personality, and victims, which you can find on our channel. We know that despite her evil ways, Roxanne never awakened during her lifetime, as she meets the conditions required for her awakening later during the Claymore Rebellion. According to Day, the 3 former #1s were chosen by him for his awakening procedure due to their power levels, their not having awakened before this, and the condition of their corpses. This indicates that despite leading a life that spread chaos and misery wherever she set foot, Roxanne was not killed in a brutal fashion. Roxanne's end is steeped in mystery, giving a strong sense of injustice to the readership, but there are clues that we can look to piece together this puzzle. We know that Roxanne's abilities were no joke, as she had amassed a formidable array of skills from her victims over the years. This could only have continued during her reign as the #1 warrior. By the time she met her end, we can safely say that no one in her generation would have been strong enough to take her on. We saw how Miria, after the time skip, solos with almost all the Claymores present at the organization's HQ. This version of Miria is almost at the same level of the #1 ranked warrior, so one can imagine what someone like Roxanne would be able to do. We bring this point forward because we want to eliminate the idea that she got ambushed by her fellow warriors and was killed. As seen in the case of Miria and Cassandra, when they are overwhelmed by sheer numbers and defeated, the wounds inflicted upon them are brutal. This doesn't seem to be the case with Roxanne. The only reason Miria was defeated was because Raftella tampered with her mind. She was also nowhere as powerful as Cassandra and Roxanne. In Miria's case, she had just lost her mental focus and, even then, cut through all her sisters. Unfortunately for Roxanne, she was her enemy in that mental state, which led to her being knocked down and mutilated. The point we're trying to make is that Roxanne is stronger than Miria and might just be slightly weaker than Cassandra. There's no way on Earth that she would be taken out by an ambush. Following Roxanne, the next #1 was Luciella, and while she was one of the first abyssal beings to be created, we can argue that if both Roxanne and Luciella's awakenings were to be compared, Roxanne's would be far more powerful. This means, even in life, she was stronger than Luciella and hence wasn't killed by her. Roxanne was also strong enough to withstand the temptations of awakening, meaning she was either super strong-willed or she was never pushed by anybody during her life to go beyond her limit as a human. All of this indicates that she wasn't killed in combat. This leaves 2 options, both of which could easily be true. We believe that she was either poisoned by somebody or she unalived herself. It's widely known that the organization found her extremely problematic due to her ways. On top of that, Roxanne committed the cardinal sin of letting the organization feel like they couldn't control her, which is something one argues they hate even more than the no-killing humans rule. Warriors that the organization feels are slipping out of their grasp have always been killed off. With Roxanne, this was clearly not a possibility. They probably did attempt it. It would make sense that, realizing they would not get anywhere near her with brute force, she was assassinated by poison. This could explain why her body was in an almost pristine condition to be worked on by day. Usually, the number one warriors are feared by all, but respected by almost all their peers. However, Roxanne, we know, was thought to be extremely creepy almost universally, except for her victims whom she charmed. Her list of people she had hurt had probably increased exponentially, earning her even more enemies. This meant that finding someone to poison her with the added bonus of not having to confront her directly would have led to a lot of volunteers for the job. The other theory regarding her demise is that she unalived herself. While this might seem somewhat shocking, let us explain and you'll see that it's not entirely outside the realm of possibilities. If you analyze Roxanne's character, the thing she was obsessed with the most wasn't power or rank, but beauty overall. This is the reason she refuses to learn Cassandra's fighting style, as she finds it ugly and beneath her. It drives her into such a murderous rage that she isn't even able to keep up her false pretenses any longer. This obsession with beauty is also reflected in how she takes care of her appearance. We know that all Claymores approach a time when they reach their limits as humans and begin awakening. For such a narcissist and control freak like Roxanne, this limitation that she couldn't overcome must have been devastating. Finally, there was an enemy whom she couldn't hoodwink, and as she felt her time approaching, out of fear for what the future held for her, she took her own life. The fear of turning into a hideous monster might have been too overwhelming for her, leading her to commit the act. When Day resurrects her, she has no choice in the matter and is already awakened, but as a normal human being, we can see Roxanne making this choice for herself. Our personal opinion is that she was poisoned, as her unaliving herself grants her an agency to her fate that she denied to many of her own victims, and we here like to believe in poetic justice. Claymores are not half-breeds. Throughout the lore of Claymore, we're told that the warriors are half-breed, part Yoma and part human. This is generally believed to be gospel truth by most fans, including us, having mentioned it in this video already. However, what if we were to tell you that this is a general misunderstanding and that Claymores aren't half-breeds at all? Longtime fans of the series might already see where we're trying to go with this. Initially, we believed the Yoma to be demons of some kind, but as the series progressed, it was revealed that these gut-craving monsters were nothing but genetically modified humans that had been created by the organization, much like the Claymores. Their origins weren't really steeped in the supernatural as much as they were in science. These beings were one of the many Yoma-related experiments that the organization had been conducting to aid in their nation's war efforts. As such, they showed very distinct characteristics from that of their cousins, the awakened beings. For instance, a Yoma has no superpowers outside of shapeshifting and enhanced physiology, while the awakened beings, as we've seen, have a plethora of unique powers. Also, in terms of appearance, the Yoma's looks don't vary much from each other, whereas the awakened beings look wildly different from one another. If an awakened being were to be classified as a stronger Yoma, it would only make sense if they were awakened from a normal Yoma, but that isn't the case. Initially, we're somewhat misled into believing that the aforementioned was the truth. However, we now know that the awakened beings are created from Claymores. During the creation of the Claymore, much like the creation of an ordinary Yoma, the flesh and blood of the creature are embedded into a human host through a special procedure that changes the person irrevocably. The difference seems to be in the details, as we don't know the exact procedure for placing the parts of the Asatacom inside the humans. The biggest reason why the Claymores aren't hybrids is because the Yoma embedded within them are already half-breeds, as they're created from genetically engineered humans with Asatacom genes. This makes Claymores, by extension, quarter breeds, which is why Claire is only 1/4 Yoma and not 1/3. We often forget that the dragonkin factor is included in this entire process as well. Therefore, upon closer inspection of their inception, Claymores are actually quarter breeds. The 7 ghosts are a representation of the 3 theological and 4 cardinal virtues. We came across a very interesting theory regarding the 7 ghosts and what they truly represent. The 3 theological virtues are said to be hope, faith, and love, while the 4 cardinal virtues are justice, fortitude, temperance, and prudence. Cynthia holds the greatest capacity for love, which landed her in hot waters with the organization. She's seen showing empathy and compassion to even the awakened beings and the enemies she's slain. Tabitha is undoubtedly Faith, as shown by her dedication towards Miria, whom she had complete faith in and will follow into the pits of hell if necessary. Despite being hot-headed and making a bad impression initially with Claire in the audience, as the series progresses, Helen proves to be the mood maker of the group. Her disposition makes her ideal to keep the morale of the group high and makes her the ideal embodiment of hope, as her attitude continues to inspire her friends. Moving on to the 4 cardinal virtues, we think it's pretty obvious that fortitude is embodied by Claire, who, despite the odds, continues to grow throughout the series as not only the weakest Claymore, but also an emotionally stunted individual, into one of the strongest warriors, surrounded by friends and loved ones, having forged several important and lifelong bonds in the process. Her willpower in rising from the bottom to the top is a testament to her fortitude. Miria, as the leader of the group, has to be prudent, as she's the one that everyone follows and looks to for guidance. She has to make prudent decisions and not be swayed by circumstances and emotions. It is her prudence that has helped her navigate the ghosts throughout the years in exile and ensure that they not only survived but also thrived even when faced with adversity. Deneve and Yoma embody justice and temperance respectively. Deneve's sense of justice can be seen in how she carries on the legacy of her friend Undine by using her dual claymores, along with her attitude, which suffers no injustice or wrong. On the other hand, Yuma embodies temperance as she brings healing and succor to her friends thanks to her healing abilities. Her calm demeanor in the face of adversity inspires her friends to remain focused even against the odds. Thus, the 7 ghosts embody these cardinal and theological virtues, each in their own way. The Great War in the continent is already over, and the organization is just trying to build their own army. Remember how we spoke earlier about how everything that was happening in the world of Claymore was to fund the Great War on the continent? How there were multiple islands and the Yoma versus Claymore conflicts had an economic connotation to them, primarily to fund the war of attrition that the organization and the nation they belonged to were engaged in? What if the opposite were true? What if there were no more conflict? There was once a Japanese soldier during the Second World War who didn't realize that the war had ended and continued his duty for several years, thinking the war still raged on. We're not told how often the men from the organization interact with their comrades and superiors from the mainland. The impression we're given, considering the things that take place on the island, is that the organization operates pretty independently. What if they haven't realized that the great conflict is over and that they've lost their fight? Rubel, who is a double agent, doesn't realize that his side has won and continues on his mission, just like that lost soldier from the Second World War. We can safely ascertain that the conflict has been going on since at least before the advent of the Claymore project on the island. Now, taking into account how old Isley and some of the older awakened beings are, it's easily been at least a couple of centuries since the fighting's been going on. How could mere humans stand up against an army of beings who are probably at least as strong as Dauf? It takes genetically engineered humans who have basically the same powers as their prey to take on these beings. There's no way that the Empire lasted for this long against the onslaught of the Asarakam. While it is cool to imagine that the organization continues to function, believing the war to be still going on, we have a much more realistic take. At some point, the organization realized that the battle had been lost. They'd taken far too long to come up with an answer to the might of the Asarakam. Forget providing a counter to the Dragonkin. Instead, the organization had created abominations that they couldn't control at all, setting them back further from their goals. As they struggled to deal with their rogue creations, the Empire was wiped out from the face of the Earth by the Asarakam. Upon realizing this had happened much later, many in the organization suffered from existential crises as the very purpose of their life had been taken away. The project that they had dedicated their life towards held no meaning. All they had achieved was creating monsters. With their loved ones, along with their nation having been wiped out, they had nowhere to turn but back to their work. We believe that this was a closely guarded secret among the upper echelons of the organization. If it were to become widely known, they would risk revolt and their work would truly have been for nothing. The members of the organization also have begun developing a god complex with how they essentially controlled the lives of the island's denizens. Power is addictive, they say, and the organization had literally gotten a taste of power that dictated whether people lived or died. They were creating a new breed of humans with the Claymores. We wouldn't be surprised if, deep down, they didn't fancy themselves as some sort of god. With the yoke of the Empire no longer holding them back, they decided to keep everyone in the dark so that they could continue their pursuits unhindered. The proceeds from the fees collected by the Claymores were more than enough to continue funding them, and if they ever ran short, they just increased the demand for their services by creating more Yoma. As the organization's reign was cut short due to the Claymore rebellion, we were left with a lot of unanswered questions. Considering all the facts that we've put forward regarding our theory, it's extremely compelling to imagine that the Claymores were being manufactured by the organization to perhaps even build their own army, not to avenge their fallen nation, but to lord over their island and the rest of the world. The so-called enemies in the war are actually the good guys. All we know is that the organization is part of an empire locked in conflict with another nation that employs super soldiers that can transform into monsters capable of wreaking untold havoc. We are, however, not told who has the moral upper hand in this conflict. Just because the enemy uses individuals capable of turning into monsters doesn't make them automatically evil. Just like in the case of an awakened being, once a dragonkin decides to transform, there's no way to reverse that process. However, unlike the awakened beings who so often turn into monsters after losing control of the Asadakam, this seems to be a conscious choice. For a person to make a conscious choice of giving up their humanity forever to turn into a hideous monster in order to protect their homeland doesn't sound entirely evil to us. One other thing that we don't know is who the aggressors are in this war. Judging by the organization and its way of doing things, the people who sanctioned this experiment most likely cannot be trusted to have their moral compasses properly aligned. There have been many instances in popular media over the years where the inhuman characters have actually been the benevolent ones, and this could very much be the case in this series. Just take a look at the organization. They're pure evil. They maim and torture little girls, set loose monsters to permanently traumatize these children, and kill the inhabitants of the island. They'll murder anyone who disobeys them, and they extort the residents for protection from a problem that they themselves created. You don't have to be much better than these folks to be the good guys. At this point, their excuse for committing these atrocities as a desperate attempt to win the war just seems to be a sack of lies. If you want our opinion, we think the Asadakam are actually the good guys in this conflict. The world of Claymore is set in an alternate Berserk timeline. As we normally like to do in these videos, for the final segment, we always pick the wildest theory that we've ever come across regarding the series in question. According to some fans, the Claymore series is set in a universe where Guts has defeated the God Hand and Femto's forces lie scattered, having devolved into warbands and clans. With Griffith dead, Falconia now lies in ruins and the rest of the human kingdoms now try to encroach upon it. However, a band of apostles still loyal to Griffith waged a war against the humans, which in this case was the empire that the organization belonged to. The organization has found a way to create pseudo-apostles, which is what the Yoma are, and the island belongs to a region that somehow escaped the effects of the astral world, which explains the lack of fantastical creatures in that location. We know this one's a little bit out there, but for a fan theory, it's not the worst one we've ever heard. Marvelous verdict! The world of Claymore continues to ask readers questions even so many years after it ended. Every read-through, there's something new to discover and speculate upon. This is all a testament to Norihiro Araki's genius. A sign of a great series is that it leaves a great deal of room for the imagination of the readers to take flight and intermingle with the ideas of the author to create an experience unique to each individual. This is why such works stand the test of time and endure generations into the future, as they provide each of their fans with their own stories that they can weave around the primary tale. Many might say that Claymore continues to live under the shadow of Berserk, which does dominate the genre, but we would say that Claymore is a legendary series in its own right and can hold its own against any other manga or anime to come out before or after it. We hope you've had as much fun as we did while exploring and theory crafting some of these topics that we just covered. As fans of the series, we'd love to hear your favorite theories as well, so let us know if any of these resonated with you or if you have some of your own down in the comments below. If this video piqued your interest, we cover everything related to Claymore and your favorite anime and manga on our channel, so be sure to check that out after you're done here, and we hope to see you in the next one. Until then, stay safe and stay marvelous.